All right, everyone. Welcome once again to the Manufacturing Ecommerce Success Series. I'm Damon Postolka, one of your hosts. Along with me, we've got Curt Anderson, the other partner in crime and host. And I am so happy today to announce who will be our speaker, but I'm going to let Curt do it. So everyone, let's go. Let's go.
Damon, thank you, man. I'm starstruck right now. So if I get a little choked up, I got Kleenex here. If I'm over 50 now. So if I get a little choked up, just bear with me. So guys, Curt Anderson, Damon is my host for the most. Thank you, Damon, for all you do. Damon is a growth and exit strategy specialist at Exit Your Way. Curt Anderson here. And again, what an absolute honor to introduce our guest. She really needs no introduction, but it's Kara Goldin, the founder and CEO of Hint Water. We have so much to cover today. We have so much that we're going to talk about. She's an e-commerce pioneer. Kara, welcome. Thank you. We know how busy you are. Thank you so much for taking time to join us today.
Thank you. Thanks for inviting me.
Absolutely. So we're going to go through a little timeline. And so as you can tell, I have my little hint shrine, my Kara shrine, if you will. So what I want to start with, Kara, so we're going to go back in time a little bit, but I hate to tell everybody, so I know I look much, much older, but we went to college around the same time. So I love the journey that you went on, and you wanted to kick off your career at Fortune magazine, if I believe. Does that ring a bell?
I did.
Kara never found herself actually working at Fortune, but get this, guys, 2011, she was, let's see, I want to cover a couple things here. She was the 10 voted or considered, not considered, you were earned the 10 most powerful women entrepreneurs. You were then on Fortune magazine, most innovative women in food and drink, and you were the prestigious most powerful women in business award. So how amazing is that? Here you wanted to work for Fortune and then just knock down all these great awards. What an honor.
Yeah, I remember when we started Hint in 2005, and I'll never forget being in the Fortune offices. And, it sort of felt like home because that was my first job in that building at Time. I didn't get a job at Fortune magazine. I got a job at Time magazine, but I was sitting down with some writers, and one of the editors walked in and she wanted to meet me. She said, I love Hint. It's great. So tell me a little bit about, did you start off at Coke? And I said, no, I actually started in this building. And she said, wait, what? And I said, yeah, in fact, I wanted to be a writer here at Fortune. So I'm sort of, a little starstruck because you're actually writing a story about, my brand that I built, and you guys would never hire me. And she said, come on, like, what, you got to tell me the story. And so I tell her the story about, how I wanted to get a job at Fortune. I was a journalism major, and I marched into the building, and her name's Patty Sellers, and she runs the most powerful women entrepreneurs. And she was dying. She just couldn't believe the story. And to this day, I mean, we're friends, and she just cracks up. She said, this is an entrepreneur in the making. She said, this is somebody who just keeps going and, doesn't stop. So it's a funny story.
Well, and you know what, and that's a perfect tie-in. So where I want to go, I'm going to go way back. So I want to talk about your dad for a second. So guys, so how I know a little bit about Kara. She's written this amazing, incredible book called Undaunted. I'm telling you, it is a game changer. It's a Wall Street bestseller. Strongly encourage everybody to grab that book. It's Undaunted. How I stumbled on Kara, I've been a Hint fan for years. We'll talk about that. But I caught you on an Entrepreneur on Fire podcast, and then you and I connected on LinkedIn. And anytime, I think most of us here are probably LinkedIn connections one way or another. Anybody that doubts the power of LinkedIn, here we are together. But let me just share a quote. This is probably my favorite quote in your book I want to share. Being undaunted is understanding what your fears are, deciding when it's important to face up to them, preparing yourself to confront them, and working through them. I want to go back to your dad. I love the story that you share on your dad, if you don't mind me sharing. So your dad actually was a food pioneer back in the 80s and was founded, I think, was an innovator of healthy choice foods. Was that correct?
Yeah, he was. He was, I call him a frustrated entrepreneur because he developed that brand within some large companies. I mean, it's interesting to think back on it. He worked initially for Armour Food Company, And the original Healthy Choice brand, it was called Dinner Classics. And so he incubated that in our kitchen. Actually, it's a funny story. I mean, with Julia Child was, coming over to my house, and all I remember, my mom had just gone back to work, follow her dreams of being in fashion, which she was an art history major. She wasn't even, my dad just kind of scratched his head. He said, "So you're going to go be in fashion now?" And she said, "Yeah." And I mean, he just said, "Okay," he just let her, she's going to go and follow her dreams and do what she wants. But I think my dad was most concerned because the sort of the quick dinner of the hour was Stouffer's TV dinners. And I don't know if any of you remember those. I don't even know if they're still around, but he just thought that they were so awful. And most people today, if maybe the person that they thought was going to, cook them dinner every night was not going to be around, most people would learn to cook. But my dad instead was, trying to figure out the best TV dinner. And so my mom said, "You work for a food company. You should just go and develop a dinner." And so that was the backstory on Healthy Choice, that he went into Armour Food Company and he said, "I want to develop this." Anyway, it's interesting because that story, I didn't know what I was going through at the time, but I watched not only an acquisition happen, I watched very early in my life where Armour Food Company was acquired by ConAgra. There was kind of a shakeup there, and my dad survived that shakeup and was incredibly loyal to ConAgra. I mean, still to this day, Healthy Choice is one of the #1 products. It's crazy to think that, he developed it way back when. And actually in the 80s, he lost his job for not having an MBA. And I share this with, college students all the time, that for anybody who sort of lived through the 80s, I mean, it was, they just went through the roster. It didn't matter what you did. If you didn't have an MBA, you were axed. I mean, I share that story still with my kids. They're like, "Wait, what?" I mean, people don't even have to go to college now to go and develop something, as long as they're successful. But back then, that's what happened. And anyway, he was laid off. And that's while I was in high school. And, we all tightened our belt. I was the youngest of 5 kids. And I kept saying to my dad, "You're really creative. You should just go develop your own company." And he said, "I'm in my 50s. I can't just go start a company. I mean, how could I do that?" And anyway, what's fascinating is he ultimately ended up getting his job back at ConAgra. He agreed. We were living in Scottsdale, Arizona. ConAgra reached out to him because they said, "Listen, some of our suppliers won't actually sell to us because they were the shrimp fishermen off the coast of Georgia. And they had heard that my dad, lost his job because he didn't have an MBA. And they said, "None of us have an MBA. So why are you buying our shrimp?" And so they wouldn't sell him shrimp. And so ultimately my dad ended up getting his job back because of his relationships with his suppliers. And so many learnings, I mean, along the way. Again, I'm just this little kid watching, just saying, "Dad, when are you going to get a job?" Looking back on that time, again, super, super, incredible lessons from there. So anyway, he ended up got his job back, actually moved to Omaha, Nebraska, where ConAgra was based for a couple of years, and then sort of lived out the rest of his journey at ConAgra. But it was such an interesting story. And one, too, I think of not only of large companies, of, how he fought to actually innovate within a large company, how, like he was incredibly loyal. I mean, and it kind of didn't matter, right? That there were points along the way that he really, that he couldn't do anything about it. I guess he could have gone back and gone to business school. But what I think the big lesson that I've learned from that, and what I share with people, is that, and I think many Gen Zers and millennials know it today, companies don't have a lot of loyalty with employees, right? They want you to deliver. And so with that in mind, you should go out and do what makes you happy, what you think you can add value to. And it's an important lesson.
Wow. What a powerful story. And when you look at like your career and we're going to get into it right now, how you started big corporate and then kind of hint is almost like hey, we're going to take a hint break, guys. Ready? Cheers. I'm going with a little cherry right now.
I know it's nice owning a water company, right? You're like constantly hydrated.
I was wrapping up a strawberry kiwi, and so then I jumped into cherry. So, but look at like Hint is kind of the rebel, if you will, of like the anti-corporate, and we're going to dig into that. But I want to take another step on your dad there. Okay.
Yeah.
So 2 things I absolutely love. Your dad would always say to you, Kara, he goes, to you, maybe always means yes. No means maybe means yes. And it is a great theme throughout the book about how relentless you are, how undaunted, title of the book, and unstoppable. But another thing that really sung to me with your father. So Kara graduated from college or was wrapping up college, and you go deep in like great stories on like you're going different parts of the country, trying to figure out what you want to do with your career. And at that age, what a pivotal point for all of us, really sets a tone of, meeting a significant other, your career, so on and so forth. You go to New York, your dream was fortune. You end up landing a potential job at Time. You come back and you say, Dad, I'm not sure if I should take the job. What advice did your father tell you?
Well, my dad always looked at life when you're trying to look at risk, actually figure out if it doesn't go the way you want it to go, what's it going to cost you? And what does that dollar amount mean to you? Because he would say that means different things to different people. And for my father, the most important thing for him was actually to be able to put food on the table and have for 5 kids and, have a, roof over your head. But he said, for you, you got to figure out how much money is left on your lease, how much, is a plane ticket back to Phoenix from New York City. And he said, you just have to figure it out. You've got some credit left on your Visa card. And so like, figure that out. And that's what your risk is. And so stop, putting walls up in front of yourself and figuring and getting scared about it. You just, at the end of the day, that is what your risk is. And then that is really, really important advice. I think what's so interesting, just kind of the journey. And also one of the reasons why I wanted to write this book is, while my dad was, incredibly wise, he didn't know how wise he was. There's just so many people along the way that have said stuff that I've just been a sponge, in picking that stuff up. But anyway, that one in particular with my dad just forced me to kind of go out there and just go take a chance. And it was scary. It was incredibly scary. One of the stories I talk about in the book that friends who lived with me in New York at the time say, I could not even believe, the stuff that happened to you out there. The first day that I was trying to find the subway in New York City, I didn't get out, past Arizona much. And I get to New York and I'm trying to find the subway, and somebody died right in front of the apartment that I was staying in. And, this police officer's just taken away the body, and there's a spray paint. I'm in my bright green, suit from Arizona thinking I'm, first day of work, and all this happens to me. And people said, weren't you scared? Didn't you at that point say, I'm going to go home? And I said, no, it couldn't happen again. It was so horrible, right? How could I be? And it didn't, right? It was an awful situation, but it was just like one more point along the journey that it's just crazy. So, but yeah, I think that's an important point to learn. And I think it's a point at any single age, anywhere you are along the way, is figure out what is the worst that can happen. And it's an important thing. And sometimes that's really scary to look at too, but whether you value it on money or time or whatever it is. Even during the pandemic, I had many people say to me, I'm thinking about, I live in San Francisco or just outside of San Francisco in Marin County. I had many people say, I think I might leave. And I think I might go to Montana or wherever. And I said, you should go. Because I think like that's the thing, that if you've got this bug where you think like I might want to go, I said, you can always go back. right? I mean, it's just, I think you just figure out what is the risk. And then a lot of people will actually go take that risk. And then others won't for whatever reason. Maybe it was just a bad idea. But if nothing else, just go. It's your journey.
That's just phenomenal. And how many, not to get into the parent thing, but sometimes parents are like, oh, you shouldn't do that, or you think the reasons not to, or we put walls up, or prevent those risks. And just brilliant advice where your dad just simply says, what's the worst that can happen? And I see my dear friend Jeffrey Stern, the CEO of Voice Express, is on our call today. He was an Upper West Sider during that same time frame, so he can relate to your story. So let's so what an inspiration with your dad. You go off to Time, have a great career, great start to your career there. You end up at this little tiny startup called CNN. And so that was interesting. So again, guys, I can't tell you everything in the book. You got to grab the book. But I'm going to jump into our program, Manufacturing Ecommerce Success. We have a true e-commerce pioneer. So what serendipity, or whatever you want to call it. So you go to Manhattan, you meet your significant other, Theo, and you guys decide to build your life. You come to the other side of the country and start in e-commerce. And can you talk a little bit about how that journey started in e-commerce, America Online, and you built a powerhouse? Can you share a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I was at CNN in New York, and then when my husband was graduating from law school from NYU, he really wanted to do technology law, and everybody, he was interviewing with all these firms in New York City. He's from New York, and everybody said, go west. Like for a couple of years, this is 1994, and everyone said, go west, you can come back to New York. It's just not really happening here. And so we went to San Francisco, engaged, and thought we were just going to be there for a couple of years. 26 years later, we're still there. And but it's interesting, when he got a job with a firm in San Francisco, and I had kind of heard about this guy, Steve Jobs, and I actually had a Macintosh when I was in college. I saved my pennies. I was sort of, starstruck by the design and the elements of, the Macintosh, and when I sort of associated Apple with Silicon Valley, and even back then, and I remember thinking, there's no way I can get a job with Apple and actually get in and, work for Steve. But I was talking about this yesterday. Back in, 1994, for those of you who were trying to research anything, I had access, because of my fiance, to this thing called LexisNexis, which was kind of the dating the Google. Like, you couldn't really search very easily for stuff. But I would go on LexisNexis and look up these companies. And so that's what I was doing. And I stumbled upon this little startup that was called 2Market. And it had spun out, it was a Steve Jobs idea. It had spun out of Apple. I figured it wasn't Apple, but it was kind of close. And it was, 5 guys who had worked for Steve at Apple. And so I saw that it was in San Mateo, California. I thought, well, I think that's in Northern California. It's probably pretty close to San Francisco. I didn't know anybody. I didn't really know the area that well, but I thought, I have a car. I can go down there if they'll actually meet with me. And so I picked up the phone and cold called, and it was what they were doing was basically taking graphics and putting it on a disc. And this was Steve's, brilliance of when speeds of computers were just not really, certainly not what they are today, but what the dream was. So you couldn't put graphics on. I mean, talking about freezing on computers, today it's like, forget it. I mean, it was just, you couldn't load anything on there, but instead this idea of put the graphics on a disc and load it in to the computer. So Apple didn't want to invest in it anymore. So these guys spun it out, and this company called America Online invested in this company. And so I was just intrigued by it. I had no experience, but I'll never forget when I picked up the phone and cold called these guys. I said, I don't know what I would do here, but I just am really, really intrigued. And I'm a big catalog shopper, and I get what you're talking about and what the issues are. And one of the guys said to me, he said, so you've worked for CNN, Ted Turner and these visionary people, these brands, these big brands that are out there. And he said, do you think you can contribute to what we're doing? And I think back on that a lot, because I think it was something where in neither of my previous jobs, anyone had ever asked me, can you contribute? And I said, yeah, I think I can. I really think that I have ideas and I think I can help in some way. And so that's when they said, okay, well, you've got a job or we're giving you an offer. And I remember that they gave me a contract. I had never had a contract prior to moving to Silicon Valley. And in the contract, I handed it to, my new lawyer husband. And he said, gosh, there's something called equity in here. They're giving you equity in the company. And I said, I knew what equity was, but I said, oh, well, I mean, is that bad? And he said, no, it's really good. I don't know if it'll be worth anything. And anyway, the net of it is we were acquired by America Online about a year later. And I was handed this button in the acquisition called shopping, and asked to just go build it. I didn't even have revenue targets that first, year. I mean, no one actually thought it was going to happen, and all kinds of stories there, actually stories that got cut from the book, including my story with Jeff Bezos. And, it's just, I mean, it was crazy. The stories that we went through in the 90s that you truly can't even make up. I mean, it's nuts. So that was, that was really kind of the beginnings of what, what we see today as D2C and so many things. But the important thing about it, I think, that I share with so many people is that we didn't know, we didn't know where the puzzle ended, right? We always believed that it didn't end. We kept adding on to what else we could do. Some of it was based on technology. Some of it was based on just what other people were doing in other industries, which frankly was just so different and so unique to when I ultimately decided to start, a beverage company. It was just such a different mindset and thinking. I go back to, my technology days as, not only today are we over 50% of our business is direct to consumer, but just the thinking and the mindset of everything from can you contribute to build a brand to, let's just keep adding on. We're never really done. All of those kind of aspects, I think, are really things that I learned, from 2Market and then ultimately at AOL.
Yeah. And so basically from zero, for those of us that have been around for a while, we remember those early 90 days of 14.4 modem dial up and how clunky it was. And, there was no Google. There was, we were years away from YouTube. We were years away from Facebook, let alone anything going on today. So, I mean, it was really primitive times compared to now. You built up, you took your shopping section of America Online, you took from 0 to $1 billion, landed a bunch of great brands, and then kind of dissipated, or you decided to start a family and it just kind of went away.
Well, first of all, I had an incredible team. I mean, I had over 200 people who were working on this business as well. But, I think it's interesting when I decided to leave, it was $1 billion in revenue. And clearly, looking back, I had been through a hockey stick situation where the company just grew like crazy. And I think I probably was saying things like, I'm kind of bored, things are different, all these things that you say when you've been through this hyper growth. Thankfully, it wasn't, a free fall where the company was just,
Right.
tanking. But I had 3 kids under the age of 4 back in San Francisco. The United Airlines pilots knew my name who were flying from San Francisco to Dulles. And, it's just, I just thought, what am I doing? And, it's funny. I say this often to parents and, people who are trying to figure out if they want a family. I think that so many people were saying to me, I mean, this was another set of doubters, that they'd say, don't take too much time off work, because I was taking I said, I'm going to take a little time off and spend time with my family because it was important to me. And people said, aren't you worried that you'll never get a job again? And I kept thinking, well, if I did a great job before, can't I get another job? I mean, right? I had more people concerned about me and, about the timing and how much time I would be taking off. And again, I think that it's something, it's a lesson of nobody really knows, right? People think like, oh, you can't take off 3 months, 6 months, a year, whatever it is. At the end of the day, if you've done a great job, then I believe you can actually get a job anytime, right? It's just, it's really about, being able to articulate yourself and share your story and really contribute more than anything else. So yeah, that was the crazy story. But yeah, I mean, I think it was also a story of, I wasn't sure I really wanted to do technology. I mean, I like technology, but here suddenly I was considered a tech executive, and in Silicon Valley. And I thought, wait, I thought I was a journalist. I thought I was, why is everybody putting me in this box around technology? And again, I enjoyed technology, but it wasn't, it wasn't sort of that wasn't my only thing that I knew how to do in life. And I think for me, that's when I really got interested in health. I got interested in health for myself, but also for my family. And I started reading labels and, really kind of becoming passionate about this. I don't think I was actually, I always lived a pretty healthy lifestyle and was an athlete and, paid attention to what I was putting in my body. I thought that diet soda was actually healthy. Little did I know until later when I really started paying attention that sort of change. But I think that's just a story of everyone's got their journey, right? And everybody's got their things that they're super passionate about. And sometimes those passions can also change. And maybe everybody listening here has thought about that. Even if you think back 10 years, did you care about certain things, but you do today? And maybe there were pivotal points along the way that changed that. Nobody can answer those questions but you. And I'm a huge believer now that all of these things along the way, even, working at Time and then CNN, and what I learned about culture, not that it was good or bad, but there were pieces that were just different, right? And everybody's got those pieces that they put into their own story, right, along the way. And that's what makes you who you are today.
Right. Absolutely. And what I have, so that, I love how you said pivotal. That's such a pivotal time right there, from that transition from America Online to what your kitchen table and, the problem that you solved. But you had, lots of connections on Silicon Valley. It was still the early times of internet e-commerce. You could have gone to Google. There were other places you could go, and you decide to, in your book, you kid around, or you talk about your Diet Coke addiction, right? And, it's very common where you talk about the entrepreneur, or not you intentionally, but people talk about that entrepreneur that solves the problem. But there's plenty of people that solve a problem for themselves, but it's another type of person that can really take it to market. Okay. So now let's dig right into Hint. Okay. So our crowd is manufacturers, e-commerce. I've got my little, I want to be a manufacturer when I grow up t-shirt for you today.
I love it.
So, who would have ever thought when you planted in the New York City that you would be made in USA, women business owned, manufacturer, e-commerce, you cover all the check marks, that kind of what we preach every week here. So let's dig right into, you're at your kitchen table, you decided to drop this little Diet Coke addiction that you talk about in your book. And you're like, you know what, I'm going to switch to water, but it's just boring to death. What do I do? How did that transition go? And I want to go right into like the day you started and said, I'm launching Hint.
Yeah. So quickly, my backstory was, I'm taking a break from, I'm having a bunch of kids and, reading labels, trying to figure out how to, be a good mom and good parent. And then I, one day looked in the mirror and realized I had developed terrible adult acne. My energy levels were a lot lower than they had ever been in my life. I didn't really have an excuse for taking a nap every single day, because I wasn't working really. I'm parenting, but I wasn't going into an office every single day. And I had gained a bunch of weight I was excellent at gaining weight over all of my pregnancies. I was terrible at losing the weight and I couldn't figure it out. So I thought, now that I've got a break from, working, I'm going to do that before I go back into my job. And so I was dieting. I looked at a lot of different diets and counting calories and reading labels, thinking, okay, I'm going to focus and I'm going to figure this out. And nothing was working. And so then one day I was drinking my Diet Coke and I thought, this is exactly, what I would cancel in food based on the ingredients. I just didn't understand the ingredients. And so I thought, I'm going to not drink Diet Coke anymore. I'm going to put it to the side and see what happens. And so I did that. And I started, getting thirsty and I started drinking water. And I thought, this is actually okay, except it really is not that engaging, right? It doesn't taste that great. I want, different taste and something. And so I started slicing up fruit and throwing it in the water. And 2.5 weeks after just making this change, I lost over 20 pounds. My skin cleared up. My energy levels went significantly higher. And then I just became so curious, right? Like, why did that happen? Because I'm drinking diet soda, Diet Coke in particular. And I thought, that just, I don't know, that's sort of counter to what I thought. At the time, diet drinks were 10 calories. They weren't 0 calories. And so it was really kind of shocking to me in so many levels as well. But that's when I thought every single day I'm getting up and I'm kind of thinking and focusing on that versus I wasn't even thinking about the tech stuff. And anytime you can find something that you're really passionate about, that you're really curious about, I think, and you can figure out, how do I make a job out of it? I mean, it's not like work then, right? It's just something you're just trying to solve this puzzle in many ways. So that was the backstory on it. And, and I kept asking around. I would ask anyone that was in the food and beverage industry, how did you get started? How did you find, information about diet sweeteners? And then, a lot of times people wouldn't talk to me because I didn't have the right experience, right? That they would say, oh, you have a lot of really interesting questions, but did you work at Pepsi before? And I said, nope, never done that. I've been in tech, I've been in journalism, and but people kind of cancel you at that point because they think, oh, not only that, but also the fact that I had 3 kids, like they're thinking, I'm not going to waste my time with this person on a lot of levels. And so that was me. And so the only way I could really figure it out was to immerse myself in it, and started going into grocery stores. I would bother anybody who looked official. Right. And I would like pray that the store owners wouldn't like kick me out of the store. Right. I would just sit there and, ask anyone if they looked like they were stocking shelves in, the cereal aisle. I would say, excuse me, I'm interested in getting a drink on the shelf, just annoying as can be. And I just didn't care because I just wasn't I always thought I can go back to tech if I want to, but right. It was entertaining to me and interesting and educational on many levels.
Right. And again, you guys, you have to get the book. It is just, you're just dying. You're reading, laughing out loud. As you're telling a story, I'm just rehashing your stories and they're just absolutely hysterical. And I'm just picturing you, in Whole Foods, just like running up to people on the counter, at the counters, like, hey, what do you asking all these questions. So it's just hysterical. So let's talk about you have 4 children. So we have Emma, Caitlin, Kenan. Am I saying that correctly? Kenan, and Justin. So what I want to share, so the day that you decided to launch Hint, you also had news for Theo that you were expecting your 4th. Can you talk a little bit about how did that go down with Theo that day?
Yeah, so I was, basically I was sharing with them that I had decided that I was going to launch this beverage company. And, he knew I was really interested in it and I had been kind of thinking about it. And he didn't think it was the best idea I'd ever come up with. He was, very straightforward about that. He had actually left his role. He was at Netscape, another tech company, and was one of their first intellectual property attorneys. And that's when, he had actually gone to a startup, and he was sort of, finishing up that startup. And so I said, listen, I'm going to start this company, and it's going to help people drink water, and it has fruit in it. And the name of the company is Wawa. And so he said, the intellectual property attorney in him said, don't call it Wawa. And again, I had grown up on the West Coast, so I hadn't, had the experience. For those of you who are not familiar, there's this store on the East Coast called Wawa, and it's a very
I real quick, I'm sorry, Teresa from Philadelphia is cracking up because that's the home of Wawa, right, Teresa?
Yeah, exactly. But again, I'm the Arizona girl. I had no idea about Wawa. And here's this New Yorker who was very familiar with Wawa. And he said, no, don't do that. Don't do Wawa. And so as I was, thinking about other ideas for a product, that's when I said to him, I said, well, here's some other names, and Hint came up along in that. And then, at that point, he wasn't my favorite person probably on that day, because I thought he just, poo-pooed my idea for a name of my company. And I'd been, up all night thinking about what I was going to call it. And so I just decided there was no better time to share with them that I was pregnant with our fourth child, Justin. And so, he walked out of the room. I wasn't sure if he was actually coming back in the room at this point, because when we launched Hint, I had 4 kids under the age of 6. I was not the profile of an entrepreneur that should be able to go and do this in an industry, that I knew nothing about. And he said, so, share with me when you think you're going to actually launch this not Wawa company. Let's, figure out exactly what you think it's going to be called. And I said, well, our baby is going to be born in about 6 months. And so that should give us enough time to kind of get the product on the shelf. And, he's just shaking his head and walking out of the room and cracking up, but not really cracking up, because I shared with him, I thought it was a good idea to actually let him know that we were taking $50,000 out of our bank account, or I was, because I, was needed to buy caps and bottles and all these things. And I didn't want him to think that I was going to the Bahamas on a girls' trip or something. And, he wasn't arguing with me about taking the money out. I've had a lot of audiences ask me about that. I had made some money and at AOL, and he wasn't arguing about it, but he really didn't think it was the best idea, because he sort of knew enough to be scared, right? And fear it. But I said, listen, I really want to do something that I think I never saw this company as yes, we are a beverage company, but for me, it was about turning the industry around and getting people to health. And I saw so much in the industry that was healthy perception versus healthy reality. This whole concept of diet drinks, again, I'd suddenly seen the light around the fact that diet didn't mean health. I had been drinking for years thinking that I was doing the right thing. And I was like, what is wrong with this industry? But I was so far ahead. And what I didn't know until we ultimately launched the company, I knew I was launching a product. I knew I was launching a new, company. But I share this with entrepreneurs all the time, that when you see that you're the only one in the market, and you think, oh, there's nobody doing this, it's great. I realized 2 months into this that that's great for about a minute, because we were launching a new category. And no matter what industry you're in, when you don't see it in the market and you're launching a new category, there's a huge amount of education that goes on with that. And, speaking about our friend Allison Levine, it's just, I think launching a category is like climbing Everest, right? Launching a company is like climbing a mountain, but launching a new category is like climbing Everest. And there's a couple of different types of entrepreneurs. You can see something in the marketplace or multiple brands in the marketplace that are in your category, and you're going to do a better version of that. But when you're doing an entirely new thing that is not on the market, then whatever time you think it's going to take to get going, double it, triple it, right? Because you've got to educate that consumer. You've got to educate the gatekeeper. In this case, it was the store buyers who, when I went to them ultimately and said, hey, I've got an unsweetened flavored water, they'd say, have you tried vitamin water? And I'm like, they didn't even have a diet version of vitamin water at the time. I said, oh, vitamin water has sugar in it. And they'd say, yeah, but it's healthy. It has vitamins and it has water in it. And I'd say, no. So I'm doing water with fruit and no sweeteners. And they'd say, well, what's wrong with diet sweeteners? And, and so you have to educate people, and they have to try your product, and you have to educate the gatekeepers. And so there were so many hurdles along the way, but I didn't care, because what I saw in front of me was a concept and an idea that if I could actually get it off the ground, I could help people get healthier. And that, to this day, is my driving force. I mean, there were not even companies, we didn't even talk about mission-driven or purpose-driven companies when I launched this almost 16 years ago now. But that's what I was doing the whole time. I mean, the beverage was the tool to really help people. And I think that anytime you're launching a company in any industry that can help people, that is so powerful, right? But it's staying alive.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the key thing. And right, it's having enough money, having enough, capital, having people that really want to be a part of, your venture. And I mean, that's a whole other chapter along the way. And, but yeah, I mean, it's a crazy story. And, we ultimately got it into Whole Foods, and I think that was the original question that you asked me when we got it into Whole Foods. I knew I was having a planned C-section for my fourth at 2:00 in the afternoon. And I woke up, my husband said, what do you want to do today? Thinking we were going to go to brunch or go on a nice walk before delivering our fourth child. And I said, I want to go and see if we can get it into Whole Foods. And because I have a pallet of water in my garage that was delivered yesterday, and it's taking up a parking space. And he said, that is not what I thought you were going to say at all. And I said, okay, I need to go to Whole Foods. And he said, you're not going to lift any cases of water. You're going to have a baby this afternoon. And anyway, so he was nice enough to get a dolly and bring 10 cases. And we went to Whole Foods together. And that's when I saw the guy that I had been, bothering for months. And I hadn't seen him in a couple of months, and he saw me, and the first thing out of his mouth was, I said, hi, do you remember me? And he said, you are so pregnant. And I said, yeah, I'm very pregnant. He said, are you going to deliver the baby right here in the store? And I said, I hope not. I mean, I'm actually having a planned C-section at 2 p.m. And he said, so what's a planned C-section? And I said, like a planned C-section versus a emergency C-section? I've had both, so I can answer any questions. And so my poor husband started backing up into the fruit and vegetable island at, in Whole Foods in San Francisco, thinking, oh my God, she's going there right now. She's going to actually tell the guy what a planned C-section is. And so he went and took a tour around the store. And that's when I said, after 15 minutes, he said, I thank you so much. I've always wondered, kind of what C-sections were. I've heard about it, but, my mom and I never talked about that stuff. I don't have any sisters. And, and Theo said, so like, are you going to put her product on the shelf, or what exactly is happening right now? And I said, yeah, that'd be a great idea. And so, but I left the store not even knowing whether or not he was going to do it. But I mean, I think that's a story of all along the way, you will meet people, and educating people and building relationships are ultimately what help you. And you don't really know how they're going to help you, right? But, people buy from people they like.
And if you don't mind me sharing, in the book, I'm glad you brought this up, because the guy calls you, so you deliver Justin
The
that
next day, yeah.
afternoon. The next day, the gentleman calls the hospital, or calls, I don't know, maybe Theo's cell phone, or call somehow. And Theo's like, hey, the guy from Whole Foods is on the phone and you're recovering the next day. And you're like, hello. And he's like, hey, the water's gone. And you're like, what do you mean the water's gone? No, we sold it. And like, you're thinking like somebody walked off with it, but the guy sold, he sold 10 cases in a day while you're in the hospital. I absolutely love that story. And our friend, we have a comment in the chat, our friend Ira Bowman, Ira has 8 children. He says, I've been great at gaining sympathy weight during my wife's pregnancy. So he's done it for 8 times. So Ira, great reason to drink hemp water. So it's not only for moms, it's for dads as well. But Kara, what I'd love to dig into is a couple of things. Number one, in your book, you make it crystal clear multiple times, great theme throughout the book, never refer to you as sweetie. Is that, and then what I'd love to, and then I want to dig into your Starbucks experience, but can you share with everybody, the folks on, because when you read the book, what you do a great job with on that entrepreneurial journey of those tipping points. Plenty of times, like you said, we're like, we could throw in a towel and I'll go back to Google, throw in a towel, I'll go back to tech or do whatever, but you just kept on, you were undaunted and kept plowing through. Tell us the sweetie story from the Coca-Cola executive.
Yeah, so it was about a year into having Hint out there, mostly in the San Francisco Bay Area, and we were getting traction, but there was just so much I didn't know, and I was, relentless. I was tired, right? Like 4 kids under the age of 6. I had help, and I had enlisted my husband at this point to help me do deliveries, but it was really just us, and it was a lot, and I was getting calls and to get recruited into pretty great roles. And I just thought, I don't know, I'm not really passionate about that, but I'm about to throw in the towel. I can't figure out how to produce a product that has a proper shelf life that Whole Foods and other markets need. And I'm so tired of talking to buyers and trying to.
She froze for a second.
My dad, how do I get our product into Safeway? And he's like, I have no idea. Like, being in ConAgra, for example, they negotiated the space for them. So he wasn't even, he didn't understand, like, how did they get slotting done exactly? That was done by somebody else. And so I recognized all the hurdles that were coming with scaling, and also, every day I would feel like I would have these wins, and then suddenly there would be something else on my list to go and do. Like, it was just never enough for these stores. Like, okay, well, you've reached, 3-month shelf life, and now what you really need is 6 months. And like, they kept moving the peanut further along, and it's so irritating and frustrating on a lot of levels. So I was sharing this with a friend of mine, and she said, I sat next to this guy on an airplane from very senior level at Coca-Cola, and you should talk to him because maybe he could like produce your product. Maybe they could put it on the trucks, and it sounded great, right? He's got, multi-billion-dollar company, years of experience, and exactly the person that I want to meet. And I remember being so prepared for, it was a call. It wasn't an in-person meeting. And after about 15 minutes of describing exactly what we had accomplished and lots of, traction in our tiny little footprint in San Francisco, but it was really, this unsweetened flavored water market was here to stay. And coming from personal experience, I'd given up the Diet Coke, and now I'm, this is the next trend. And he interrupted me and said, sweetie, Americans love sweet. This product isn't going anywhere. And I was like, whoa, like, sweetie? I'm thinking, okay. And so many people, I've shared that story with people over the years, and they've said, why didn't you say, excuse me, or hang up the phone on them? Or
I'm watching people cringe on Zoom right now. They're like, it's like needle off the record player, right?
Yeah, no. And I remember sharing this with my dad, and he's like, oh, it's a good thing you weren't sitting across the table from him. That really probably wouldn't have ended well. Like, he would have seen your face. So I was just in shock. And then I just listened for the next 45 minutes, why he believed that people didn't want unsweetened flavored water. And again, the diet industry 16 years ago was, they were at 10 calories for drinks. They weren't at 0 calories yet. So he went on to say, the real thing is that we have to get to 0 calories eventually, because the consumer wants sweeter things. They just want to see 0. And so I just kept thinking, but what if it doesn't work? What if it doesn't make you healthy? And I think that the big thing that I saw that, really I look at that time in tech that it kind of enabled me to think a little bit more about this was we had put a customer on our bottles from day one. We had put an 800 number and an email on our bottle, which was not what people were doing in the beverage industry 16 years ago. And so we had done it because that's what everybody did in tech. And, don't tell anybody if they reached out on the email or the customer service number, but the customer service person was me. And so from day one, I started getting these phone calls from customers, saying, hey, I just had your product at Whole Foods and, it's super, it really helps me drink water. I started hearing about this new disease that I had never heard about before called type 2 diabetes. And it was probably 2% of the population had type 2 diabetes or pre-diabetes. My roommate from college actually still does work for the Center for Disease Control. And I reached out to her and I said, what is type 2 diabetes like as compared to type 1 diabetes? And she was saying that the interesting thing about type 2 diabetes was that it was very small, but that the people who were claiming to be getting type 2 versus type 1, which, you're born with type 1, you're acquiring type 2, and they're really still not exactly sure what is causing this over time, but they claim to be drinking and eating diet and low fat and really trying to, to live this healthy lifestyle. And yet they hadn't really figured out exactly what was going on, but I was hearing it from the customers that they were looking to try and eliminate and figure it out on their own. And so, and by the way, today, type 2 diabetes is 40 to 45% of the population has type 2 diabetes or pre-diabetes. And the same is still true where people are claiming that, they're trying, they're, eating healthier things and it's still not working. And anyway, it's just, it's a whole crazy thing. And so while this guy at Coca-Cola was sharing that it needs to get down to 0 and they want to make diet sweeteners that are sweeter, I kept thinking about these customers who frankly were like me, just trying to get healthier. And I thought the decks are so stacked against the average consumer that's just trying to get healthy. And this guy, this industry like guru running $billion company, he's not on the same mission or the same page as me. And so when I finally hung up the phone, and it was, a great conversation, it was fine, I thought I have a choice. I either quit, which I think he thought I was going to, or I put the gas on because he doesn't get it. And this is just, and it was my job to continue to help. And I really, to this day, I mean, I think that having that relationship, and it was so small back then. And like I said, part of the, the biggest reason that we've done direct to consumer is to have that relationship with the customer. When, I opened my eyes and saw it like so much just by remembering my conversations that I had had with this customers saying, you're helping me, right? They didn't know me, just through a bottle of water. They're saying to me, you're really helping. And I thought, so that gave me energy. That gave me energy even when, these large companies are, and, people running large initiatives they were not on the same page. And so that's what I did. And I, just keep moving forward.
That is awesome. And I want to be mindful of your time. I know we're coming into
I'm good.
So, and so from my family to yours, thank you for being undaunted and plowing through. If you have another minute or two, I would love
totally
to share the Starbucks story. And again, I'm sorry to throw out a bunch of things in your book, guys. you have to buy the book. But you make a comment about how you would tell a lot of people, hey, we're having a dialogue with McDonald's and Starbucks. Theo would chime in and say, hey, Kara, it's more of a monologue. It's not really a dialogue.
Yeah.
So again, like
that still happens, by the way. So I still talk about my dialogues and
I could just hear the two of you like going at it, but I love your sense of humor in your book. It just really resonates. It's a wonderful business book. But I'm not a coffee drinker, but I would meet people in Starbucks back in the day, and not being a coffee drinker, I would love walking to Starbucks and I would get a bottle of, I think it was blackberry, if I'm not mistaken.
It was the blackberry.
I'm like, there's actually a drink that I don't drink soda, I don't drink coffee, and I don't like plain water. Somebody out there solved my problem. It was on Starbucks, but then all of a sudden it wasn't on Starbucks. Can you tell everybody what happened there?
Yeah, so we got into Starbucks, and if there's people always talk to me about what were the points along the way, and building Hint that you remember were like pivotal points and celebrations and hard times, and Starbucks hits all of those, right? We got into Starbucks, it was just the blackberry hint, and I remember thinking, we were really smart about it. I really pressed Starbucks for what is success to you guys. They didn't, sometimes you get in and you don't even ask, right? You're like, okay, we're in. And, but I said, I don't want to go in unless I actually know what success is. And so finally got a number out of them, and it was 1.5 bottles per store per day. We were supposed to launch in a few hundred stores. Then they called us back and they said, 11,000 stores. And so we were off to the races. It took us about 6 months to kind of achieve success with them. And then every single day I looked at that number and I saw it growing. And after about 1.5 years, we were doing 3 times what success was for them. And I was feeling so cocky and confident about my Starbucks numbers. I had a little mini celebration every single day because of what was going on at Starbucks. We get an email from the new buyer at Starbucks, and she said, hey, can we set up a call? I'm thinking, sure, let's all send a bottle of champagne. I mean, everything's great at Starbucks. And she said, I have some bad news for you. And I even said, it can't be that bad. I mean, let's all be a little positive this morning. I'm doing, 3 times the amount. And she said, unfortunately, we're changing strategy, directive from the CEO's office, and we're eliminating Hint from the case. And I said, what do you mean? You can't do that. She said, no, we actually can do that. And I said, no, I have millions of dollars worth of product that is sitting in my warehouse right now of just blackberry Hint. So you can't do that. And it's going to go bad. Right. And I said, when are you guys thinking that you would like to do this? And she said, next week. And I said, next week? I mean, you can't do that. I have all this product. I got to go back to my investors. This is crazy. And she said, I'm really sorry. And click. And I just thought, I don't cry very often, but I cried on that day. I remember shaking at that conversation, thinking, oh my gosh, we had probably, 10 people in the company at this point. It was a bad day. And then when I resurfaced after a couple of days, I thought, so the good news about Starbucks, if there is any good news, I'm always trying to look for the good, is that they exposed us to so many doors throughout there's a Starbucks in every corner, right? And so we were in areas that we would have never had the money to go and get distribution. We didn't have people, et cetera. So Starbucks was the only place that you could find us. And so that was the good part, but I still didn't know what to do with the inventory. And so we ended up, trying to still figure it out. I was trying to figure out, how do I find those customers? How do I let them know? Starbucks would not give us, of course, the register data. Even if they had the names or the emails, which they probably didn't, they wouldn't give it to us. And so I was really stuck on this problem and not really knowing sort of where it was going to go. And I got an email actually from a buyer at Amazon. And what's a funny piece about the buyer at Amazon is he reached out to me and he said, I don't know if you remember me, but I used to work at Time Magazine. And I said, you're kidding. And he said, no, I remember you at Time Magazine. I'm a few years older, but when I heard that you ran Hint, I remember you as always being super helpful and funny, and just like, he didn't work in my same team, but it was interesting. And I mean, it's an important point because you just never know who's watching, right? And how they can help you later in life, and how there's just so many things along the journey where, as Steve Jobs used to say, the dots eventually connect.
Right. So
anyway, he said, I'm in charge of all of grocery for Amazon. And I buy your product at Starbucks every morning. And I didn't even have the guts to tell him that we had been kicked out of Starbucks at this point. I mean, the conversation's going great. And I thought, do I share with him that we're actually not in Starbucks anymore?
Right.
But I didn't. And he said, how long is it going to take me to get, some Hint? And I said, oh, well, we had an overrun of BlackBerry Hint. So if you're interested in buying it, if you want to wire me the money for a couple of truckloads, I'm super happy to sell it to you. And he said, yeah, that sounds awesome. So anyway, we became the #1 product on Amazon grocery. And he was so thrilled. He was really excited. I'm sitting in the Seattle offices about a year later. We were doing more than BlackBerry Hint. And he said, what's really interesting about your product as compared to other beverages? And I'm like, what's that? And he said, the people that are buying Hint are also buying diabetes monitors and other healthy items that cross over categories. And I said, that's really interesting. And I'm sharing kind of my purpose of why I started the company. And he said, yeah, very different than other products that are, in beverage, like soda, et cetera. And I said, gosh, can you give me some of those emails? Because I'd really like to reach out to these customers and get some more information. And he said, does Starbucks give you the data? And I said, no, as a matter of fact, they don't give me. And he said, does Whole Foods give you the data? I said, no. And he said, you think Jeff Bezos is going to give you the data? And I said, well, I don't know. I mean, it's my data. And he said, no. This is not your data. This is my data. He said, I buy your product and I sell it, and that's our data.
Right.
And I said, oh, well, I guess so. And it was that moment, that pivotal moment where I thought, he's so right. Like, I've been sitting here for 8 years, basically selling my product to all of these companies. They have all of the data and the relationship with the customer. And so I'm flying on Southwest from Seattle back to San Francisco. And I'm just sitting here thinking, how do I get this data? And I'm like, I'm never going to get this data out of any of these people, Amazon or any of these retailers. Instead, I need to start my own direct-to-consumer company. And that was a little over 7 years ago now, on drinkhint.com. Again, I had the experience to go and do it, but story that I share in the book is that, my board was not psyched about it. They had 10 reasons why it wouldn't be successful. And so Theo and I that weekend, bought basically Shopify before Shopify bought, e-commerce in a box and set it up. My teenage kids were cracking up at me saying, like, do you code? I mean, do you actually know how to do this? I'm like, it's all good. Like, I'll figure it out. It was the worst store ever. Like, it was like, but it worked. And that's what I share with people, I think, is a theme throughout, Hint really, is that always understand that you can improve on what you're doing, but you start somewhere. Right. And anyway, the overall overarching story of that too, that, I think about Starbucks to this day fondly, is that the dots eventually connect. Right. And I don't know if it's a circle or if it's a triangle, but for me, when challenging times happen, Starbucks kicking us out of there, you have to believe that, there's something good will come out of it. For me, that buyer at Amazon, would he have, reached out to us if he wasn't buying it at Starbucks every day?
Right.
And then ultimately for me to actually figure out that we needed to do a direct to consumer business, it was because of Starbucks and because of Amazon.
Right.
And so all of these challenging times, maybe it's the pandemic for you, right? Maybe it's all of these things where you start to really look back on those times and figure out, how do I actually move forward? And what do I do with this information? And I think that is the key thing that I got out of that.
I'll tell you, you are such an inspiration. And Gail, our friend, is saying that she loves these stories. Jeff was just asking from New Jersey if, did Starbucks ever call back after the success on Amazon?
No, it was funny. I was speaking actually at an event, and Howard Schultz was there, and and I've met him a couple of times, and and he never said anything about it. And again, it's funny because I think when you really live a life of knowing that the dots eventually do connect, it really, I was angry at the time, but I'm all good, right? And I think, you can look back on life and think that it was all part of the bigger picture, right? And I look at so much of that now, and it's healthier, right? It's just, and you look back and you're just like, it's all good. I'm not angry. I'm not, if Starbucks wanted to do something with us, I mean, we would definitely do something with Starbucks. But I think more than anything, today, our direct to consumer business, that tripled during 2020. I mean, tripled, right? And the fact that we had it set up, and, at the beginning of the pandemic, we had over 1 million people in our database, customers that were buying Hint. I mean, and I look back on Amazon, and by the way, we still sell through Amazon. We love Amazon. I mean, Amazon's great. And during the pandemic, at a time when, people were having challenging shipping products, we have our own relationships with FedEx Ground and ship products, but Amazon's got their own airplanes where they're shipping. And so consumers say to us, like, should I buy it at Target or Costco or at Amazon? I mean, what helps you the most? I mean, that's what's so crazy about our relationship with our consumers. Can you imagine actually writing to a company and saying, I want to help you guys succeed? Like, where should I buy your product? I get those emails every single day. That's crazy, right? That says that I've got this relationship with the consumer and I'm doing it right. And what my answer is, go buy it at Target or Costco or Amazon, or, if it's cheaper and that's what and they have the right flavor, I mean, go do it. That I believe that the customer today controls how and where they're going to buy. And if you are not servicing that customer with that mindset, then you're going to lose.
Man, you are such an inspiration. Man, we could talk all day. And the thing is, the chapters of your book, I love, align with the cause, build the plane while you're flying it. It goes on and on. I love your story because I can't imagine there's been a manufacturer that hasn't had that vulnerability where a big chunk of sales, 20, 30, 50% are with either that one customer, that one industry, pandemic comes along, aerospace, whatever it is, your fault, not your fault. All of us have been there where we lose that big customer. Now, what do you do? And what I love about your story, and where this really resonates with our crowd, hitting the manufacturers that are brand new to e-commerce, they are scared to death of like breaking that supply chain of like, hey, we've always gone through these channels. This is how we've always done it. If I go direct to consumer or direct to that end user, I might offend those folks. So I love your story of like, hey, we've eliminated that vulnerability by creating engagement and millions of customers, as opposed to having all of our eggs in one basket. And I think that's another one of your chapters.
Yeah. And I mean, I think that sort of lessons learned there too is obviously the customer, like having that direct relationship with customers. And again, there's plenty of people that haven't ordered our product on drinkhint.com that are buying our product in stores, and they go to Costco every week, and that's awesome. And we want that relationship to be successful. But it's what we've seen is that the more we actually invest, all of our ads, for example, that we run on Facebook and Google, those all go to drinkhint.com. But we know that there are customers that go on Amazon. I buy stuff on Amazon, and I also go to Costco and Target and Whole Foods. And what we've seen is that as we've spent more money on, social and online, they're actually going into that has increased offline too. And it just does. And I think it's just this halo, and really thinking about the customer is just going to, they're going to buy wherever they're going to buy. But in terms of manufacturing, I mean, I'm a huge believer that you just have to have options, right? That, the Starbucks story is not just about, where you're actually being sold, but one of always thinking about that. What if this thing goes away tomorrow? What's the worst that can happen, and how bad is that going to affect you? And, being a little bit paranoid to some extent too. And another friend of mine I talk about in the book, Josh Dorff. I had met him early on, and Josh his family started the first organic whole wheat flour company. He said this to me when I was just starting Hint. I said, how do I get into Whole Foods? And he said, you'll get into Whole Foods, but the most important thing is never allow a retailer to control your destiny. It's pick and shovel work. And I'm like writing pick and shovel work. I'm like, what's pick and shovel work? And he said that they don't really, I mean, they'll like you, but they'll make their own decisions. And the day that you sit there and basically hand the keys over to any retailer, any supplier, any whatever shipping company, you're vulnerable.
Right.
And you have to think about it that way. And I think people have said, when we've been in meetings and sort of articulated this to suppliers and why we're doing what we're doing, we're like, look, you could go away tomorrow. You could tell us that you don't love us anymore. And at the end of the day, like, we got to stay in business. I've got employees that are depending on me. Right. And this is what I've got to do. So they're like, you're so authentic. I'm like, no, I'm real. Like, this is like, I've been through it. I know these things. I got the Starbucks story. I got all these journeys along the way, and I didn't love those times. And so anyway, there are a lot of stories. And I'll also say, two other quick things. Even during the pandemic, the book was already inked before the pandemic. I've told this story a couple of times, that in the book, I talk about the 2008, 2009 financial crisis. It was not pretty for Hint. We almost could not survive, right? I think that the one thing we've really prided ourselves on, we've never missed payroll. We've never, overhired. We are, when you come into Hint, you're rolling up your sleeves. You're sometimes doing 2 jobs until it's too much, and then we hire another person. We're really, even to this day, I still, everybody works really, really hard in this company and needs to love what they're doing, and they're compensated appropriately as well. But 2008, 2009, we almost ran out of money. And we didn't have enough money. And when the pandemic hit at the end of March, I reached out after closing our offices. I called my CFO and I said, we need money. Like, we need 2 years worth of money. We're growing and we need money. And he said, Kara, his name's Julio. Julio knows me really well, very good friend, worked for me for 10 years. He said, everybody's on Zoom right now. You're not going to raise money. This pandemic will go away. Yeah. And we'll be fine. And I said, I said, 2008, 2009 is just like sitting there with me. And I need 2 years of capital in the bank, because we don't know what's going to happen. And he said, you're not going to be able to raise money on Zoom. And I said, Zoom is a tool, and don't allow Zoom to be your wall. And he said, I'm with you. I don't know how this is going to happen. And I said, it's going to happen because we're going to stop allowing that wall to get too big. And we need to go out and raise money. And we did.
Nice.
And of course, we had the business set up properly. It was growing.
Right.
We had, all the right story.
Sure.
But again, with the minute you allow your fears to build that wall up in a way, and I look back again on the 2008, 2009 time as I never really knew why I experienced what those dark days. And, those days when, people just said, like, we had major retailers say to us, unless you, pay us and give us free product, we're going to kick you out of here. I mean, it was awful. It was awful on so many levels. And I just said, I'm not going there again. And again, these points in your journey are really the ones that set you up. I think the 2000, 2008, 2009 set me up in so many ways for the pandemic.
Wow. I'll tell you, you are such an inspiration. You are being so generous with your time. I know
Yeah,
we're way over. So I have one last question for you. So we have a bunch of moms on the call. We have my friend Alyssa's expected, her and her significant other are expecting, and we have Aaron and my friends Jen down in Miami. Your son Keenan had a comment in the book. He said, "Mom, I just realized not many women run companies." How, as a, I worship my mother. I'm a dad. I'm a girl dad.
Yeah.
I tell you, you are such an inspiration for manufacturers, for e-commerce direct to the consumer. You check so many boxes. As a mom, thank you for what you're doing. But what a great comment for Keenan to just not even be aware. And you're just breaking ceilings. You're an inspiration for so many women entrepreneurs out there. So kudos to you. Congratulations for what you do. And what do your kids think of mom being this hugely successful entrepreneur?
Well, it was a story, when your kids sit there and like, especially when you feel like you hear it everywhere else, like, and you have your own guilt about working as a parent, right? Not just mothers, but I think, you're wondering, am I spending too much time like off working and not spending enough time with my kids? And suddenly my son's like, Mom, I just watched Sheryl Sandberg on TV talking about leaning in and, and it's all horrible. And, and I love Sheryl, actually, I really do. And, but that whole lean in initiative, I just, was really kind of looking at it as challenging, right? For people that were trying to work and have balance and et cetera. And so I said, that's right, Keenan, like, there are challenges. And he said, well, why aren't there very many, female CEOs and founders out there? And I said, I don't really know the answer. So the next day he came back, he plays a ton of tennis, and he came back and he said, Mom, why are girls teams and boys teams for tennis? And I said, I don't know, like, you tell me, why are there girls and boys? And he said, well, there's better tennis players on the girls team. They're way better than some of these boys. So I think I'm going to go and tell the coach that there are certain girls that I'd rather be playing tennis with. And I said, you go do that. And it was at that moment that I realized that just by doing what I do every single day, I'm actually teaching my kids that it's just rules are gender should be there, but it should be based on what you do and how good you are, right? And so it was, and I think it's still to this day. I mean, you asked the question about, what did they think? I'm working on a huge initiative in Washington around clean water, and I briefly talk about it in the book. And it was frankly put on hold with the Trump administration to some extent, and hopefully. With the new infrastructure bill that's in place, about, I think 111 billion is in that bill to actually clean up water infrastructure. So, which sadly might not even be enough for what they want to do. They want to replace all the pipes across the country for the lead and lots of other stuff that I've been focused on. But I've been working with Congresswoman Jackie Speer to actually take it before Congress. And, if we get it where we want to go, I'd be testifying in Congress about what I know about water and potentially even some of our partners that we co-pack through. I've talked to them about, because there's great variety across the US and our water quality based on states. And we remove all of the stuff out of the water, but it varies significantly. And things like PFAS and things, it's not just lead, arsenic, et cetera. So anyway, he said to me, hey, and actually my other kids as well, they said, well, if you go before Congress and you're testifying, like, for sure, we want to come, we want to get out of school. There are 3 of them in college. But again, like, I think what they've learned is follow your passion, go and do what you do every single day. And I think what they would say still to this day, as my daughter was in a car when she was little, and a friend of mine was driving her to a play date, and she said, "Where's your mom?" Because I had to go out of town, and she said, "Oh, I don't know. I think she's fighting big soda or something. I have no idea what she's doing." Like, to be able to be a parent and be doing something that actually has purpose and meaning. And every single day they think, even to this day, they think mom's a little crazy, but she's actually doing stuff where 6 months ago it wasn't happening, and now it's happening. So if you can be, I think that's what every parent wants to be. That's what every human wants to be. Do something with purpose that's going to make a mark and make a difference.
Yep, align with the cause. Well, I'll tell you, you are an absolute blessing. Again, thank anybody on the call can. I drink hint every Friday in our show. I'm drinking hint with my clients, so I'm a hintaholic. Guys, I strongly encourage you, if I can get your book here, check out Kara's book. It is a game changer. Love this book. So, one last question, my BFF gal up in Canada. She said, "Is Hint in Canada?"
We are in a small way. We're in really on the coast, Toronto and Vancouver, but we're hoping actually with Costco that we're actually going to be expanding that extremely. With the pandemic, it's been a little challenging too, with border issues. So, but we're hoping that that's going to happen. So, but definitely, let me reach out to me. I'm all over social at Kara Goldin. And if I can, answer questions. I mean, the big thing that I wanted to do was just let people know that, it can't happen if you don't try, and you got to believe, and, all the elements along the way of, staying alive and having enough money to do it, having a team that really believes and supports. And, you don't have to have tons of experience to go do stuff. As I always say to my team, it's none of this is brain surgery, right? It's just about critical thinking and just trying to ask lots of different people along the way. And oftentimes it's not the people that have been industry giants that are the ones that are actually going to have all the answers to your questions, because you're, trying to do something different in some way. And so look around and be free to ask people. And it's, the information's out there. It's for you to actually take that information and execute on it.
Yeah. And I love the David and Goliath, where, the giant soda companies just cannot figure it out, for whatever reason, left a nice door open for you. And again, you've created an incredible product. You deliver healthy, you have sunscreen now, you have deodorant that you offer. So you have a multitude of different products. So, and again, Kara, you are such an incredible inspiration, such a blessing.
Thank you.
For entrepreneurs, women entrepreneurs, children. My daughter worships you. And so again, thank you. You're so generous with your time. I appreciate it. I'm going to give everybody a big cheers.
Cheers.
Happy
Cheers.
Friday.
Thanks, guys.
Go out and get hint. And so I'm going to stop recording. Thank you, everybody. Thank you.